There's no one way to make a sourdough starter. I mean, there are things that you need to take into account when you're making a sourdough starter, but there's no right or wrong way to do it. But what I'm going to run through are the main tips and things that you need to be thinking about when you're starting a sourdough starter. So I mentioned using stone ground wholemeal flour because that's where you're going to get the most microbial load. And it's important to have that as freshly ground as possible. So a fresher, newer flour is better. The next thing you need is water. Now water is this magical moment. And what I've got in this pot is 100 grams of flour, and I'm going to add in 100 grams or so of water. Now I say or so, I'm really sorry, I'm not going to be desperately precise with you because what I'm looking for is consistency. And depending on how your flour has been milled and the extraction of your flour is going to depend on how much water you need to add. So what I need you to do is recognise texture, not necessarily the exact number of grams of water or millilitres of water you need to add in. What's important right now is that this water is sitting at about 30 degrees because what I'm aiming to do, 29.9, what I'm aiming to do here is use the water temperature to get a desired dough temperature because fermentation is at its optimal point when it's nice and warm. So this is warm, it's wet, okay? We've got liquid, it's all squidgy. Oh, the microbes are going to be so happy in here. There's no need to add fruit in. There's no need to add anything else in really. The thing that's very, very important, and I can't stress how important this is that your container is sterile, it's clean, and that you're not cross-contaminating from other sources of microbes. If you've got strong cheese in the house, if you've got other fermentations, it's probably better to keep this slightly away from that area. But don't worry about getting your hands in there, okay? Because hands are one of the key places of us getting microbes in there. So it's good to get your hands in there. It's what you want, but obviously you don't want some old cheese microbes in there because it will affect the flavour of what develops in there and what you're capturing. So day one, I often leave the pot for 24 hours on day one. It's the one day when I'll kind of really leave it. And you need a lid. Do not put a lid on that is going to stop all oxygen in there. So set that aside somewhere warm. If you've got a warm spot in the kitchen, that is where you need to put it. So I'm literally just going to pop that on the side over here. And then the next day, you will come back to it. And it's going to very much start fermenting. If you can just have a little look at the bubbles in here, what you're going to see is this just the very, very beginnings of microbial life. You can see that these are just beginning to form. Now I know this sounds a little strange and you're going to wonder why on earth we do this, but we do this because it needs refreshing, okay? So I'm going to take the lid off, get a spoon, and I'm going to take half of it out. Now half of it is effectively 100 grams because we have got about 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water. So as I take that out, you can see, and it's often best to take the top half out because that has got the acetobacter on there. And I'm just going to pop that into a bowl over here. So I'm taking the top half out, if that makes any sense, and I'm keeping the bottom. You can already see that acetobacter on there, okay? And I'm just going to take that out and leave that over here, okay? Another spoon here, sorry, a different spoon because I want to get a close-up on that in a minute. And that has taken half out. And now what I have to do is I have to put half back in. So half, because it's 100% hydration, this one is 50 grams of flour, which I'm going to use, in fact, I'm going to use this one. 50 grams of flour, you can see here, okay. A little bit more. There we go. Give or take. And 50 grams of water. Oops, There we go, dead on. Okay, and I'm going to mix that back up. Now getting oxygen in is really important, okay? I've got a stick in this glass jar. It's only glass because I want you to see through it. So I'd often do this in something that was a little bit more robust, like a stoneware pot. I love stoneware pots. I find them much more beautiful to use. Okay, but it is important, as I say, to get oxygen in there. So do give it a good, nice stir. If your flour is thick and taking up all the water, just add a little drop more in, because the wetter it is, the more fermentation, because you've given water to the enzymes. There we go, that's it. Now that's the consistency I'm after. Can you see that consistency? It's good. You can speed up the fermentation by adding in more water, but this is one of the things that is really down to the individual. There we go. Sometimes when it's too wet, you don't get fermentation as fast. So it's really a matter of you finding the level that your flour needs hydrating to. Okay, so I'm going to pop that lid on there. Okay, that's the end of day 1. Day 2, I've kept that pot somewhere really warm, okay? It's sat nice and cozy at least 25, 26 degrees. There are various ways that you can keep DDT, and you can refer to the DDT video to have a look and see how you can do that, but it's important to keep it warm. Day 2, well, the magic has really started to happen there, because I know I've got microbes in the flour, and I know that we've kept it nice and warm, and you can just see the very, very beginnings of it really starting to ferment. And it's not quite doubled. I mean, it's there, but it's not to the top of the pot. So you can have a look and see in there we've started to get good fermentation. There we go. What you do at this point really changes everything. What you have to do is double refresh every day. So I kind of bookend either end of the day, and I refresh in the morning when I get up and have my breakfast, and I refresh again before I go to bed. And again, it's just exactly the same process. So you take out of there half of that. There we go. Oh, that's almost exactly half. Add in 50 grams of flour, and again, whoops, I had a shower already this morning. 50 grams of water. There we go. And you give it a really good mix. Now, if you don't do this twice a day, it will get really acidic because it's really started to ferment. And you can see now as I stir it, something very important, it's much more viscous. It's much more viscous because the flour has been broken down by those microbes. And that is really one of those things that you will notice when you're stirring, is that the composition and the thickness of the flour makes it much easier to stir. So I'll give that one more stir, cover that over. As I say, you have to do this twice a day. And it is like having a Tamagotchi for a few days. It can take anything from sort of 3 days up to, sometimes up to 14 days if you live somewhere very cold, to really get fermentation going. Okay, you sometimes have to clean your jar between refreshments, just transfer it to another jar and then put it back in. So that's day 2. Now day 3, we're really rocking and rolling here. I mean, this is really starting to look fantastic, okay? This is our 3rd day, and this, you can smell that fermentation. I mean, off with the lid and you'll notice that this is transformed from just being floury and watery. I can now smell that acid. It's really coming into play now. Okay, so exactly the same, double refreshment either end of the day. You know how to do that now, so I'm just going to leave that to one side. But what I am going to do is show you day 4. Day 4, day 5, this is essential. You really need it to be doubling in the pot. You can see that from day 1 to now, that starter has filled the jar, and you can see the pattern on the top of it is indicative of huge fermentation. There are bubbles, it's robust, it's really, really healthy. And if you can get a wholemeal to double in 3 to 4 hours, you're rocking and rolling. It's time to bake. As one other small thing before you have to move on to a maintenance schedule. Some people don't want to keep a wholemeal starter, and that's okay. So if you want to transform your starter into another flour, for example, you want to make a white sourdough starter or a rye wholemeal starter or any other starter, then all you need to do is take a fresh jar. It's terribly easy. You take about 100 grams again of the kind of flour that you want to use. Now, you can use to get your starter going something like a wholemeal or a rye. Rye flour is fantastic to get your sourdough starter going, but it doesn't necessarily fit in with your maintenance schedule or the flavour that you want to create. So, to transform your flour, I'm using an organic white, putting in 100 grams. You know what's coming. There we go. Okay. 100 grams of water. Also, there we go. Oh, that's bang on. Getting good at this. You take a spoon of your sourdough culture. That is just beautiful. It's about 25 grams or so. And you add that in to your white. That's all you need. Okay, we'll set that to one side. And you give that a really good stir, and hey presto, you have a white starter. And it's as simple as that. When you transfer it and you move the flour, what you will find is that the smell will change a little, viscosity will change, and the rate of fermentation will change. But in essence, you can now start refreshing this one with white flour, and you have a white starter. So you can test its readiness by leaving your white one out. This one takes about 8 hours, and one of the things you can do is test by using a float test with the white to see if it's ready. I will tell you this, your wholemeal one will never float. You can keep popping it in water, but generally a well fermented whole grain rye or wholemeal flour will sink. So don't rely on that as a testing mechanism. That generally only works for white. And congratulations, you have your own new baby, incredible sourdough starter. Welcome to a whole new world of baking amazing, beautiful, incredible sourdough. It's an extraordinary journey, and it starts with a starter.